The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are only those of the speaker and do not represent the views and opinions of any other than them who said them. Welcome to episode 4 of 1H. 1H is a platform intended to help people share their thoughts and ideas regarding decentralized education, leadership, technology, and analysis. 1H is hosted on the Gridcoin Discord server every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 1 a.m. UTC, and everyone is welcome to join in the conversation through the Discord chat. 1H episodes will be no longer than 75 minutes, though they may be shorter depending on how many speakers and subjects are scheduled for the episode. For now, each episode is broken into 3 20-minute blocks, which can be reserved by individuals or groups who wish to explore the subject. To reserve a block, reach out to Jay Ringo in the Gridcoin Discord server and the Gridcoin Slack with the subject you wish to discuss and the participants who intend to speak. To qualify for a time slot, you or a participant must have written and published something at least somewhat covering what you intend to speak about. There are 3 rules when it comes to broadcasting on 1H. You can talk about a project, but only if you're using it as an example to illustrate the idea behind the project. The focus of any subject should somehow be related to decentralized education, leadership, technology, or analysis. Swearing and vulgarity is not permitted. And I do ask that unless otherwise suggested by the speaker of the block, you hold all questions and comments until the end when the speaker will open the discussion up for everyone. And last but not least, 1H is meant to evolve as a community project. Suggestions and ideas are always welcome. So the fire is lit, the hearth is warm. Let's get underway. So today's episode is called The Community Corporation, a new definition of work led by the blockchain. And we're going to be exploring what it means to be a community corporation and how that differs from current corporations, which are primarily hierarchical. And we will be leading the discussion with the following questions. What is work? How has the concept of work evolved over the years? How has it differed between societies over time? And how might the blockchain change how we view what we currently call corporation or companies and work? So to start off, we're going to do a brief little wrap up of what work has been like in humanity as far back as we can go. And when you really think about this, at least I come to the conclusion that work is pretty new in this grand scope of humanity. And I'm not the only one here. A lot of these ideas are going to be coming from talks that were given during the recent World Economic Forum. So if you are interested in this sort of stuff, give that a Google and listen to the talks. There's a lot of really smart people talking about really fun stuff. So humanity started out as these hunter-gatherers, and work could be said to be survival. We walked around, we scavenged, we hunted, we did what we had to do to survive through the elements. And civilization came around, like 10,000 years ago, something like that. And specialization began, and things started to change. Work was not what it is like today, but it was not hunter and gatherer. People had specific tasks to complete, and by completing these tasks, they were able to gather what they needed to survive. And then when we bring that through to today, we can see several different iterations of what work has been through the years. We've had serf systems in the feudal age. We had the Renaissance, where you had like these can't think of the name right now, but you just had very wealthy individuals who would hire people to do very specific tasks, and then you had this entire other class of people who worked who were agrarian, who worked the farms and whatnot to get the food for the cities. And then you get to the industrial age, which is only 100, 150 years, 200 years old, and work really began to change into what we see it today, where you wake up in the morning, you go to a specific job, you turn a screw for 8 hours a day. Before unions, it was well more than 8 hours a day. And you get paid, you go home, and you hang out with your family. Again, after unions, before that, you really didn't have time to do much else. So that's really how we view work still in today's society. Even with the digital industrial revolution, we still have 9-to-5 jobs. We go do a specific task and get sent home. We're educated to do a very specific task. Colleges are built around this idea. Companies are built around this idea. Everything we do as a society when it comes to work is built around this idea. But when I think about it, work can be a lot of different things, especially when you think back to what life was like before civilization and what we saw as work back then. So a lot of people would say that raising a kid is work. A lot of people would say that playing sports is work. there are all these things that people say are work, but we don't treat it as work in society in the way we treat other things as work. So when we will eventually get to talking about things like universal basic income, and you can say that that is a good idea, because what about these right now it's women who stay at home and work, and they're not going to work for a factory, but they're still doing work. So when you look at it from a business perspective, and it's a little cold to look at it this way, but they should be paid for that work. Raising the kids is a very important job. And that also ties into the general view of how male centric our work system is right now. And that shift is happening, hopefully, but slowly, the shift to a more equal work environment. So it's a very short intro there. We're going to talk a little more about some other stuff, but I'm wondering if anyone here has some other thoughts about how they view work, and what sort of, maybe if there are things that we might consider work, but society doesn't consider work. So I'll open it up here for any conversation.
Yeah, so what I would just add is, to your point regarding hunters and gatherers, farther back, and really a basic civilization, work was really considered more of like a physical act. And we can see that today in like today's trades. Like you go to work, you're tired because you were at work. And it was much more physical, about survival, and actual things were produced as a result: farming, hunting, so on and so forth. What I think it's migrated towards in the age of specialization has been more about productivity. Something is still produced, but what we define as a society as a production has vastly like increased, right? When someone is an author, they produce a book, right? They're writing. It might only be typing or sometimes thinking, but they're still technically working, right? An artist is still technically working, even if they're just painting. It's not necessarily a heavily physically involved act, but it's definitely something is produced, right? With sports, the difference between work and play is technically you are producing a good. Like sports, you are producing entertainment. And I think so. I would kind of go into what is actually produced when we're talking about work, and also the idea of productivity as a whole, which would kind of get into the idea of pay and work.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think particularly in the last 100 years, since capitalism has run wild, productivity and efficiency in particular has become a very important part of what we view as work. So these, for lack of a better term, these capitalist companies focus on efficiency, and their focus on efficiency is leading to something we'll talk about a little bit later, but the automation of jobs, and how a lot of people who would be seen as productive today or even a decade ago are about to be not, their productivity is going to be surpassed by a machine. And that there's the idea that we've said this before throughout history, but now we live in the digital age, and it's kind of this thing that might actually happen this time, where productivity of humans is surpassed by machines. And I think you're exactly right when you talk about this, and in particular, just to circle back, just particularly in the past 100 years or so. And Teknix in the text chat, just a reminder, you don't need to have a mic to participate here. There is a text chat. You can come and just talk as we're talking, and we'll bring it into the podcast. Teknix says work versus job. So I think that's a very important distinction. It kind of ties to what I was talking about, how like raising a child is work, but it's not viewed as a job. A job is something like going to the factory, doing the same thing for 9 hours, being productive, like Goblin was just saying. All right, so that gives us a nice base to move on to the next thing, which is the general shift of work over time. And what I can speak to from my experience is the past couple 100 years, as we have shifted from largely in the U.S., at least from a largely agrarian society, into this production-based society that Goblin was talking about. And just a nice little stat we've got right here. In around 1900, during the apex of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we had about 40% of our workers being agricultural workers. And now it's much smaller than that. We don't need as many people to produce the food for us. We have more people working in factories, and some stats are thrown around are about 2% or so of our population works on farms. So that is evidence that work does change through time. And if you wanted to, you could go further back in time. Another really a low-hanging fruit here is the feudal system. Uh, when that system shifted into capitalism, it was a shift of people working for a lord to people working for money, and the things that people received uh, for their work changed. Instead of protection and being part of this community culture, but it's not community in the way we think about it right now. Uh, Shifted to a more independent, work for yourself, make money, and build your own life, which turned into what we have today, where a lot of businesses just, again, to bring it back to efficiency, try to build the best product as fast as they can, and best is the product that sells the most stuff. And as we look into the future, there are there's the idea that work hasn't stopped this shift from agriculture to industrial to factory workers to the next thing is supposed to be automation. And there's the concept that about 2/3 of the job market right now is about to be automated. And primarily it's going to be low paying jobs that are automated. So we can see contemporary examples of this from Amazon, where they just opened up their fully automated grocery store, which sounds like an awesome idea. You go in and you just shop and you don't need to sit in a line or anything like that. And it's not like you go to an automated teller. There's no one building machines for this stuff. It's through codes and networking and cameras and all this stuff that is it doesn't employ a lot of people to build these things as opposed to building the automated tellers. But beyond that, there are a lot of people who work these cashier jobs and they're gone. And in order to, I'll sort of bring this into the next section, but in order to make sure that we don't lose those people to despair and to irrelevancy and to fear, it's going to require a lot of education and reskilling. And this is where we bring the blockchain into it, because the blockchain is based around internet communities. And internet communities, from my experience, formed around people who had more fun on the internet with the opportunities they had on the internet than with the opportunities they had outside of the internet. And they built these communities, these global communities. And some people became famous in them, other people did other things in them, but everyone found their own sort of niche and their own joy from it. And it wasn't so much it wasn't so much like people going to work for stuff, but people did work for these things, like World of Warcraft guilds. People put in a lot of time and effort, and they built these things to do some pretty crazy stuff. And this was before blockchain and before incentive structures and before the ability to hold data in a distributed ledger and then mint a currency based on that data and that process. And now that we have that, we have this concept of the internet community built into an economic system. And I think what that is going to do is going to change a lot of stuff, and it's giving us a way to change the way we view work that we've never had before. So before we get into specifics, there's a lot there. Does anyone have any ideas about how work has changed throughout years?
I think one example I kind of wanted to add on, or excuse me, two examples I kind of wanted to add on was regarding your comment on not to leave people behind and education. There's actually a very interesting video. I forget who produced it. It's a short, probably 10-minute clip that discusses it discusses coal miners in central U.S. Learning to code as a alternative job source now that the various coal mines are starting to shut down and be less demand around coal. It's very interesting to watch these guys go from manual labor for their entire life to I learned what Java is and I actually think it's kind of fun and now I'm making money off this and I don't even have to be. I can still live in my hometown but still make money, right? And then the other thing, as a fun little aside, when you mentioned the World of Warcraft guilds, you also have things like EVE Online, where people legitimately make money for the work they're putting in. Like people are making and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in games, which is interesting in itself.
Yeah, right. Just to get this reputation in this online community, not for maybe some of them know each other in real life, but more or less just to do something they enjoy and they view it as work. They view it as a job. It's an interesting point there. And to what you were talking about the coal miners, absolutely, and that's happening across the board when it's taking people whose jobs are sort of disappearing, who either like coal, we no longer depend so much on coal, or what have you. It's also encompassing as we try to bring a whole. It's encompassing a lot more demographics as we try to bring equality to the work to the way society views work. So you've got a lot of programs that are trying to teach women to code, and they're like hundreds of people, thousands of people are signing up for this stuff and just learning code, doing whatever, and getting into the workforce that way. You have these other countries like India and Asia who have a huge number of people joining the workforce every month or year. It's either 1 million or 5 million a month in India are joining the workforce, which is it's a lot of people, and they have to find ways to give them jobs. And it's now becoming so much more difficult to teach them a specialized job, like the way our well, this will bring it into the next section. So the way that our academic system is set up right now is you go to college, you get specialized in a specific thing, and then you leave college and you go into the workforce. We've almost completely left apprenticeships and that sort of idea behind. And now we have a world that needs people who are able to do many different things, but we have people who are specialized in only specific things. So an idea that's tossed around a lot is this concept of continuing education throughout life, where, for example, our grandparents might have worked one job in their life. We might work one or two jobs in our life. The generation after us and coming into the workforce now is likely going to work multiple jobs, up to like 6 jobs in their lifetime. And it's not like they're working them all at the same time. It's just like some of these jobs you don't need to work in a 9 to 5. So why have someone specialize in one thing to put in 2 hours of work but do a 9 to 5 job? So the idea is having this cycle open where you can go to work, go to school, go to work, go to school, and keep learning new skills as we need them as a society. Because it's not like the if you even look at coders, people who learned to code in the 80s have had to continue learning new languages as they come out. And that's a perfect example of what it takes to stay up to date in the coding realm. And that's going to start trickling into the rest of society. And a good way to bring it is through apprenticeships. So you have sort of this introductory course, and then you have an apprenticeship with someone who already knows the skill. And hopefully, I think that sort of concept of job training will come back, and it's a perfect idea when it comes to open source communities, because the idea of an open source community is kind of like the Hippocratic Oath before they started changing it uh, for various reasons. But the Hippocratic Oath in the beginning said that you as a doctor are going to teach another doctor for no cost, because it is a noble thing that you're just going to pass your knowledge on, and by passing knowledge on, every generation will get better at that thing. So that same idea sort of exists in open source communities, from what I found at least, where you go in and no one's going to hand you the information, but if you put the effort forward to show that you're here to learn something, people will point you in the right direction. They'll give you resources. They'll tell you where to look in the code to find this thing that you want to learn. They'll tell you who they learned from and who they respect as an idea person, and who they respect as a builder. And it builds this system where you can continue to learn without having to go to college. And it brings a lot more people in. And it's exactly what we do in the blockchain community. The Gridcoin community is a great example of this. I see so many people, myself included, who come into the community, and there's so many technical aspects of it. There's just like, what is this thing? What is magnitude? What is rack? What is all this? Well, here's the Wikipedia. You can go read it. And then you come back with questions, and they answer your questions. And they're like, you're right. That Wikipedia article is a little surfacey, but here's the code you can look at that really goes into what the details of it are. And from that, everyone learns a little more, and even the people who are teaching learn from the people who are learning. And that is, in my opinion, one way that the blockchain is changing the way that we view work through the education system. So the biggest way I think that the blockchain is and the open source community structure of it is changing stuff ties back to unions and collective bargaining. So the way we structure jobs now is you have a boss or you have a board. They make the rules, and as we talked last week, they build the incentive structures that everyone else has to play by. When what came with the blockchain is this way to decentralize to decentralize governance and to have a community that can actually self-govern through a protocol. And instead of in the past, when people try to build these decentralized communities, they generally fail unless a leader comes up. Now you have a protocol that becomes sort of the leader, and a dozen people, 100 people, 1,000 people, however many people participate in building and maintaining that protocol. And then someone can come up anonymously, perhaps Satoshi Nakamoto put this idea out there. They can just come up anonymously and put this thing out there, add to the protocol, and then disappear. And it doesn't matter that they disappear. The protocol remains the leader. And now the next person can come up and add something to it. And if the community agrees with that, it becomes the new protocol. If the community doesn't agree with it, it doesn't become the new protocol. If half of the community agrees with it and half of the community disagrees with it, you can fork into two separate communities that are still sort of similar but run on different protocols. And you get to have this competition between protocols that isn't necessarily directed at each other. It's just which one works best. And I mean, if you look at the contemporary forks in blockchain tech, like Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, it can get a little heated at times, but in general, they are two separate ideas or two separate implementations of the same idea of Bitcoin. And or time will tell which one works better, or maybe they both work just as fine and both continue to exist forever. And it's this idea of removing the boss and just making this decentralized leader that can continue forever. And that is the beauty of the blockchain and when it comes to working. And when you have a cryptocurrency that gets minted by this blockchain, by this protocol, is essentially like a boss having a treasury that then pays their workers. So if you build into the protocol a way to pay people who contribute to the system, it's not necessarily a meritocracy, but it's similar to it, but it's based on a protocol instead of one person saying you contributed and you other person didn't. So you now have work connected to it where you can contribute to this community like if it were a World of Warcraft guild, you could contribute to it and then you get paid for it, but not out of anyone's pocket, out of a protocol. And it's almost like working for the Federal Reserve where you get paid because they take a loan out and mint the money and all that stuff. But it's not run by a group of people. It's run by a consensus of a lot of people. I've got more, but I've been ranting on. So if anyone has any thoughts here, feel free.
You're saying it's not controlled by us, it's controlled by like the crowd as opposed to a small group of people. With a lot of Gridcoin's polling and everything, a lot of it's done via magnitude. So doesn't that leave it open to potentially be controlled by a few large whales coming in and voting in a way that would interest them?
Absolutely, that's a fair question because it's a problem that is in a lot of blockchain communities too, where voting weight, particularly in proof of stake. Let's bring this back. So proof of work was supposed to solve this problem by decentralizing power into hardware, where you contributed to the blockchain by mining hashes. And the idea was that a lot of people will contribute computing power and then life will be good. What happened is people consolidated hashing power, and it turned out to be about 5 mining pools controlling the blockchain. And the blockchain is the protocol. So if they control the blockchain, they get to change things whenever they want. So proof of stake comes along is for other reasons, and the idea is that those with more balance hold control the creation of the blockchain. And then with proof of stake, I might be butchering my history here, but with proof of stake came voting on the blockchain. And the idea for a lot of these voting mechanisms is the more coins or tokens you hold, the more weight you hold in the system. And Gridcoin ties magnitude in that, which is the contributions you give to the blockchain, to the approved research projects, currently BOINC. So you're absolutely right. Those with more balance and more who contribute more to these projects, they have more power to control the direction of the overall protocol. Now, when I think about it, I also think that's a problem, but it is still more decentralized than what we had before blockchains in general. It's more decentralized than proof of work as it exists today. And it will likely become more decentralized in the future because we are very young when it comes to this technology. Proof of work is less than 10 years old. Proof of stake is about 5 years old. So I have little doubt that there will be better protocols in the future that decentralize governance. And I think one of them is called Aragon, which is sort of working on this issue. But I do think it's an issue that's a good issue to bring up.
I just want to add to that that a lot of these problems can be, and they can't be solved, but they can be addressed by looking at the incentive structures of how the blockchain is built. And so for right now, like if you look at the Gridcoin polls, some amount, it's, your magnitude times, this, constant number. And so like it's basically your computing power times this number plus your stake in Gridcoin. And, that's equal to, your vote. And so there's not, that much power given to a lot of regular people, I guess, who are running this maybe on their desktop at home, and that's all they're contributing, and they don't have a lot of Gridcoin either. And so the question is, well, on the one hand, a lot of people do have a lot more stake in the coin, and I guess that's one of the points of proof of stake, is to you're proving that you care about this coin, basically, and you're willing to put that up at risk in order to verify the integrity of the blockchain. And so, on the one hand, it's justifiable that some people have, more say or more control than others do. But on the other hand, you do want, the community at large, BOINC, has thousands or tens of thousands of users. You want them to have a say too. And so, as we develop and grow, and like Jamingo said, like as we develop and grow, this stuff can change over time. And so, we can implement, different protocols for how polls are made that make it, more equal. But, this is, there's no perfect way to, solve these problems. But, over time, we can look at it from different perspectives and, try to come up with a solution.
I think it's a great way to look at it. It's not like we're solving these problems. It's we're taking the experiences of the previous attempts to solve these problems and building on top of them to try to solve it better or approach it in a better way, in a more equitable way. And thinking even more about it, there are already different protocols out there that do seek to solve this problem. There's distributed proof of stake, where all the smaller people, let's call them, team up to support an individual. And that individual could be someone with a large stake, or it could be someone with zero stake that all these other people respect a lot and want to be the representative. And when all those small people team up, it creates someone with a large stake. There's also Dash created this thing called masternodes. Personally, I don't agree with the concept, but the idea is that someone with enough stake in the system becomes the master node, and it's exactly what it sounds like. They get to make all the decisions, and if they break one of the rules that allows them to be a master node, they're kicked out of the system. Just like in distributed proof of stake, where if there's a constitution ratified that says you can be a witness, is what this representative is called. You can be a witness so long as you follow these rules. And if you break these rules, you're immediately kicked out. And there is a waiting list of people who want to become witnesses because there's an incentive to want to be a witness, and there's incentives not to not want to break the rules of being a witness. So there are these ideas that are coming forward, but yeah, it's just it'll be work, and I think we'll get there.
Okay, and definitely to tie this all back, just in a nice bow would be to say it really depends on what work the distribution of the blockchain that you're working with values, right? Do you with Gridcoin, the staking kind of shows that you value the network being active and you value people holding it and doing those transactions and being a node. And like with other cryptos like Bitcoin and such, where you're just doing math, you're doing just crunching, you're valuing the work of the CPU as opposed to just network, right? So I feel like the kind of ones that you pick are really what you're showing you value, but like the work specifically that you value in that distribution.
I think that's a good way to look at it. So another way that I think that the blockchain is changing the way we view work is sort of similar to what we've been talking about. It's this idea of microtransactions, where I do things every day that are considered work, but it's like it was one small thing, so no one's going to pay me to do that one small thing. We can now put that in a protocol where when you do this one small thing, like edit a line on a wiki page that has a typo in it or there's inaccurate information, you can get paid for it out of the protocol. So uh, as people lose their specialized jobs because specialization is sort of disappearing, except for a few major sectors, they can do things that they might consider hobbies and get paid for these things. And it goes back into the idea of continuing education. You can continue to do things for different entities. You can edit a wiki page. You can go pick up trash. You can do a couple lines of code if you know code. You can submit some graphical art to open source projects. You can do write-ups for open source projects. A lot of it is open source in my mind because that's the world that I love. But there's a lot of small things that you can do that add up over time. It's the idea of the freelance economy built onto a blockchain, sort of, and it's a new way to look at work instead of going to a 9 to 5, turning a screw, and going home. I think that's going to be a very large part of the blockchain ecosystem moving forward in the next 5 or 10 years. Gridcoin is actually an example of this. You're getting paid for contributing to BOINC projects, and that's a kind of a microtransaction for the people with small desktop computers or laptops or phones who are contributing to this. You're contributing a very small amount that when 1 million of you contribute a small amount, it is huge. It's a big deal. In the past, you would have had to hire the one person that can do a large amount of work and pay that one person. It didn't make sense to go around and pay everyone a penny. Now you can pay everyone a penny really quickly without even thinking about it. And so when you contribute a small amount over time, those pennies add up. And if you do enough of it, you can make money off of it. And it's supplementary income. It's almost like a universal basic income when you think of idle processing power built into a blockchain. So that's actually all the notes I have for today. Just to recap, it's the blockchain, the community corporation is the idea of a corporation that's run by a whole bunch of people that define incentive structures and priorities, and who those participants are paid based on the protocol, which is agreed upon by everyone. And it's not that you have one CEO. It's not like you have a CTO or a network analyst. You have a lot of network analysts who contribute in their free time, or I don't know if we can even call it free time at that point, but they contribute and they all get paid based on how much they contribute to it directly out of the protocol. And it opens the world up to more people doing more things. And a lot of the time, they'll be able to do things that they enjoy, which is, can you call that work at that point? I wouldn't. I would call it getting paid for contributing to something you believe in. And when you build this, ideally, you build a system of continuing education where it breaks down the academic bubble, where you don't need to go to this college and meet the right person who will then hire you after college because you got this very specialized education. You can continually learn from people who know about the thing you want to learn about through this sort of apprenticeship mechanism. And then, however far you want to go with it, you can contribute to that level. There are very brilliant network analysts who will do the more in-depth stuff, and then there's still the maintenance of networks that needs to be done that can be done by network hobbyists. And ideally, the network hobbyists would not be so interested that they want to be that top level network analyst, but it's still something they enjoy to do, and they'll contribute on this. Why not? And then the network analyst, the high level person who spent a lot of their life learning the very in-depth technical details of this, would be rewarded based on that, and they would also find it fun. It's not like they went into the computer science world because they thought it would be a good way to get a high-paying job coming out the other end, then end up working a 9 to 5 that they really don't like for the rest of their life, and then that job being taken by some further automated mechanism down the road, forcing them to go back to school when they're 40 or 50 years old, which is what's happening right now. And we're seeing the results of it all around the world when people lose their jobs in that way, when they feel like they can't contribute. It plays with your mind. Irrelevancy is a very powerful emotion. And the way the blockchains runs their communities, I really think is a great way to stop it from getting out of control. What about what are your guys' experience in the blockchain and how you contribute to stuff? And do you stake coins, and what's that feel like, and what's the whole ecosystem look like to you?
So I personally, I invested a little bit in Bitcoin, more or less just to say I could be part of that movement. I made like $500 and I got out and was more than content with the fact that I could tell my kids one day in the history books when it talks about the Bitcoin bubble and all that junk, I could be like, yeah, I made some money in that, right? But what I actually like mine and what I actually actively do is kind of more the I have Raspberry Pis that just run my Gridcoin wallet for just staking, and I travel a significant amount for work, and I'm in hotels all the time, so I bring a lot of laptops with me because I'm in a hotel. So that's kind of what I do. And I will say the reason I brought up the whale comment and the voting based off magnitude is primarily because it's even though I did dabble in computer science in college, coding was like one of those things I didn't really love doing. It's just something I found I could do if I put enough time and effort into it. And with Gridcoin, I was able to set up the wallet pretty easily. And I tried to do solo mining. It really didn't work for me. There were too many pages. I felt like it was a little complicated. And then I found GRC Pool, and I was able to do it really easy, really quick. So what I do is I have all my machines crunch for GRC Pool, and they just feed into my wallet that I host myself, right? And like I can stake on that wallet, and it's awesome. But because I do it in that fashion, because I wasn't, in my opinion, because I wasn't technical enough or tech savvy enough to want to get the solo mining done, I don't have a magnitude. So a number of the polls are closed to me, even though I have something like like 7,000 or so GRC, right? So I guess that's my concern. I don't know if it's still in the fireside chat if we're just talking, but that's kind of just why I brought that up, and that's my experience was more or less the ability to solo mine some of the projects, regardless of the project, which project. Just it had a little bit of a learning curve to it that kind of kept me from doing any solo.
Yeah, and this is a great example of how this open community concept of just people being able to come into a community and contribute what they want to contribute and what they can contribute benefits the overall what we're calling community corporation here. Because the way it would work before is you would have to have a boss, and then the boss would have to recognize that problem, and then the boss would have to go out and hire someone who's specialized in UX, UI, coding, and they have to go and find these like 5 or 6 people, employ them, give them a specific task, and maybe he directs them to do something in a way that they don't want to do it, so they complete this task, but they're not enjoying it when they're doing it, so they don't do as great a job as they would have otherwise. So that's the way it would be. But the way that it is with the community, with the blockchain and open source and this community corporation, is that people recognize that problem. And it's people eventually get to the point where they want to help fix it. And they're able to come in and help to the best of their ability change those things. There are people in Gridcoin specifically who come in and they're helping to update the documentation. In the past 3 months, we've had I think 2 new blockchains. We just had another website pop up that's helping to consolidate some new user information and try to help smooth that process out. And it's not as quick at this moment in time as a centralized process, and it's not quite decentralized. It's more distributed right now, so it's in fact pretty inefficient. But it's something that builds over time because again we're very young, and people in the community decide whether or not this is a good source of information, whether or not this person did a good job, and it's not like you did a bad job, so your source is worthless. It's each contribution is supported by as much of the community who supports it. And people coming in have the opportunity to see which resource is supported by more people and which resource is supported by people who are respected in the community already by as they are already contributors to some level, one or another. So a developer who's been in the project for 4 years will probably have a louder voice or carry more weight than random guy B who just came in last week. So that's the way it works in this sort of free and open community corporate structure. And I think the ideal system would be to put that sort of reputation and respect level, that concept that stemmed from early internet communities into a protocol. And so you reward this for your developer with this is getting a little specific, but with a non-transferable token that is a reputation value, essentially like Reddit or whatever. And they can use that reputation value to support specific projects and say, I vouch for this, I like this contribution. Well, they're not saying that this is the way we're going to go. They're saying, I support this. And if everyone in the community does it, you end up with specific nodes that become highly supported nodes. And at that point, you have a decentralized structure. You don't have a centralized person saying, this is what we're going to do. And I'm here because of I either worked my ass off or I'm nepotistic or whatever. You have a bunch, maybe in the picture in my head, there's like a dozen or 2 dozen, but it could be 1,000 different nodes that have great levels of respect that come together and say, this is what we're going to do. And that is the way to take a system away from distributed and decentralized and make it a completely decentralized community corporation. And that would make your problem ideally go away because they would recognize it and they say, we need to do this. All the nodes get together, they support it one way or another, and they get something done. Chocolate, were you going to say something?
Yeah. So just to, as an example of what you were saying, so, I came, I really like the idea of Gridcoin, and I'm a researcher, so I really, I think that Gridcoin is amazing for all the reasons everybody else said. But to back up what you were saying about people coming in and offering, solutions to problems, that's so those two posts I wrote about the incentive structures in Gridcoin. So now what I'm doing is I've been working on a model that would, fairly compare, the different hardware, CPUs and GPUs, and ultimately, it's what the conclusion I'm coming to is tying the creation of Gridcoin to some amount of energy. So very close to how, the idea of Bitcoin is, you hear this argument sometimes is that, it costs $1,000 to create one Bitcoin, so I'm thinking about it more in terms of energy. How much energy does it take to create one Gridcoin? And I'm trying to normalize to that. And I've been, building this up, and it's taking a lot of work, but I'm doing it because I think, it'll be valuable in the future. It might not be. It's not like it's 50% implementable right now. 50% it's not going to be implementable for a bit of time. But the reason I'm doing it at all is because if I think that if we want Gridcoin to grow to the size that we I think it can be. I think many of us think it can be, a lot bigger than it is, given the necessity for computational power. I think there needs to be a more direct relationship between the amount of, work that you contribute to the computational power and how much Gridcoin you receive from it, which is not how it's set up right now. And so that's just, as an example, I'm coming in and I'm trying to, analyze, what I think and is a problem. And I've seen actually previous posts about this from other people in the Gridcoin community who think that this is a problem. Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to do.
I think I can offer a rather unique perspective. For anyone who doesn't know, I work usually on web development. I have also been doing some forays into testnet and core wallet development testing. When I started out with Gridcoin about 2 years ago, there was no paid development system in place. About a year after I got into Gridcoin, I noticed that our main website, gridcoin.us, it kind of looked clunky and a little old and outdated, and it really didn't seem kind of up to standards of what I would expect a modern crypto website to look like. In college, I specialized in web development, and I've always been pretty good at web development. So I contacted some of the people who were on the web team and basically volunteered to help anywhere I could. I was volunteering for web for probably about 3 or 4 months before the paid development system came around. And I'll admit, when it came around, that really changed my mindset towards it. It went from being this side project hobby of, a little here, a little there, I'll throw in a few hours, once a week, to, hey, I can actually get paid for this. I'm going to do this almost as like a side job to make some extra money. And I do. I make usually about $100-$200 a month in Gridcoin doing mostly web development. And yeah, a lot of the stuff Jay Ringo was saying, about building incentive for people to do work, whether it be through a reputation system, whether it be through incentivizing through bounties, or just plain old paying developers. It really does incentivize people who maybe have the ability to change and improve the system but weren't motivated enough before. I did it, for free, but I greatly increased my time spent once the money was involved. And I think that's true for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think those are both good stories about where you're coming from. Like Barton, you came in with doing it for free, doing it because you thought this is something that you like and it's something that you enjoy doing and it's something that you felt like you can contribute to. Chocolate, exactly the same thing. You come in and you said this is something I support. This is a great idea. This is a great concept. Here is a problem that I see, and here's something I enjoy doing and something I feel like I can contribute to. My story is very similar. I love Gridcoin and I see some problems. Here's how I can contribute, and I do the work to contribute to them. And when you, like what Barton was saying, when you incentivize people to do that, they will do it, just like we were talking about last week. When you incentivize people to contribute their idle processing potential to uh, distributed networks, they will do it. Why wouldn't they do it? So when you have this Bitcoin blockchain protocol, Gridcoin blockchain protocol, and you can do it without having someone in charge, people are even more willing to do it. When they can read the code or read the English translation of the code language or whatever language they want and understand it, and then even submit potential changes to the way that payment structure is put forward. And if it's a good enough change or if enough community members support it, get that change implemented, they'll contribute even more. And it's work at that point. When you're paid, it's what we would call work today. It's a job. But a lot of the time, it doesn't feel like work. And in the cryptocurrency world in particular, is part of the main principle of the blockchain is when everyone works towards making this thing better, everyone gets paid more because you're not necessarily given Gridcoin, but you make it so Gridcoin is more respected. It has more confidence behind it. It has a more powerful direction. It's more approachable by a lot of people. To Goblin, what you were talking about, there's an easier on ramp for people. So it can be more readily adopted, and that all increases the price of the Gridcoin that exists, and it increases the staying power of this thing we all like. So there's that money incentive to it, and at the same time, there's the we build this thing to make it better because it is something that we all support as an idea and as a community, and we all love the community. One of my favorite things about this particular blockchain is the community. We've got a lot of people from all over the place, and they're all working for this specific purpose. I think a lot of them know in the back of their heads that when they contribute positively, they're increasing the price of Gridcoin. But I think at the forefront, a lot of them are thinking, when I contribute positively, I'm building this thing that's larger than myself, which is something that doesn't exist in contemporary work systems. A lot of people work just 9 to 5 to get a paycheck, to get bread. And that, to me, I've said this probably 3 times already, but that to me is the beauty of the blockchain. It changes the way we see work, and it changes the way that we're paid for our work, and that we're not told to do work. We're able to contribute work and get paid for it. It's at least I hope that it is going to change a lot of stuff in our lifetimes. So contribute to the communities you love. If you're not on board with Gridcoin, find a blockchain that you support, because in the larger blockchain ecosystem, we're all part of the same base technology. And sure, we can compete friendly competition between each other, but we're all here to change the world in one way or another, much in the way that the early internet and early email system, like before the companies got involved, were there to make email that was cool, make the internet that was worth using, build this thing that was larger than themselves that they all supported. So unless anyone has any more stories they want to tell or any more ideas about how the blockchain is going to change work in the future, or the idea of a community corporation, how that would function, I will wrap things up here. I want to thank everyone for joining us this week on the episode 4 of 1H. It was a very enjoyable conversation. I know I did a lot of talking, but it was fun to hear everyone's sort of experiences with what this ecosystem is like and what it's like to contribute to open source communities. Join us next week for another episode of 1H. It'll be our 5th episode. Happy days. And again, if anyone would like to sign up for a block, feel free to reach out to me in the Gridcoin Discord server. You can talk about anything that ties to decentralized education, leadership, technology, or analysis. Yeah, that's it. Have a great weekend, everyone.